You're listening to the Fresh Hell podcast. Fresh Hell contains stories of a disturbing and often graphic nature and is intended for a mature audience. Please don't let your kids listen to this, or they might turn out like us.
Hi, I'm Annie in the States.
And I'm Johanna in Austria, and this is Fresh Hell, your favorite international podcast.
We hope. We have a quick update. We have a slight correction from last week when I mistakenly said that Apollo is the god of war.
Yeah, Apollo isn't the god of war, it's Ares.
I know, it's Ares, but I said Apollo, who is, of course, the sun god and also archery, so that makes sense with the arrows, but neither of us caught it. But my friend Erin did, thanks to her son having just done a project on the old gods. So, yeah, we need like a week-long nap on a beach with someone bringing us frozen beverages, I think.
We really do, yeah. Thanks, Erin, and thanks, Erin's son, for catching this.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So, I just recently read a story about the Empire State Building, and it made me wonder, it was like, how have I never heard this story before? And so I sent the link to you, and I don't think you'd heard of it before, and then that got us talking about other aspects of the Empire State Building. And so this is going to be an episode, is it the first or is it the second? Was the St. Augustine Lighthouse the first? But an episode where we talk about the macabre history of a place.
There are so many places to cover. We mentioned already that we really want to do an episode about the Chelsea and the Cecil, but we could also talk about the Dakota Building, Alcatraz.
Oh yeah, the Tower of London, the Winchester Mystery House. You get the picture. There's a lot, and we really want to talk about the stuff that the usual tour guides aren't going to mention to the general public. The kind of facts that the PR people at these historic sites save for a special haunted tour that you pay extra for, if it's offered, you know. But today we want to tell you about all of the mysteries and macabre weird history that we could find about the Empire State Building.
And a quick warning to our listeners, we'll be discussing suicides and 9/11 type scenarios, so if those are particularly difficult topics for you, it might be best to skip this episode. Shall we begin?
Let's. Okay. So, the Empire State Building was named for New York, which is the Empire State. All of the states have nicknames. Massachusetts is the Bay State. California is, of course, the Golden State. And Missouri, where my mom was born, is the Show Me State. When I was a kid, I used to call it the You Show Me Yours, I'll Show You Mine State, which my mom thought was charming. But really, it's called that because they're very pragmatic people. You know, don't tell them something, show them. But this is a podcast, so we're going to have to tell you. We can't show you. And the state of New York is the Empire State. Some say because New York was described by George Washington as the seat of the empire, and some say it's because so many places in the state are named after Greco-Roman Empire names like Troy, Syracuse, Rome, Utica, lots of others. But either way, the nickname stuck. Where the Empire State Building sits today used to be the site of the original Waldorf and Astoria hotels. Yep, you heard that right, 2 hotels. The Waldorf was the first. It was designed by Henry Janeway Hardenberg in the German Renaissance style for William Waldorf Astor. William was the only child of John Jacob Astor III, and when he died in 1890, William was suddenly one of the wealthiest men in the United States, if not the world. One of the first things he did was to tear down his father's mansion, located on the corner of 5th Ave and 33rd Street.
As you do.
Yeah, right? First step, I'm going to tear down this mansion. And he built a hotel. So the 2 things we need to talk about is, can you imagine how much was lost when they tore down that mansion? Like...
Annie, I know this thought must be so horrible for you.
It's painful. It's so sad. And then secondly, this is maybe my favorite bit because it's a little bit gossipy. So turns out that when the hotel was built, it was built as a spite hotel. Some of you might know about spite houses. I'm obsessed with them.
I have to say that I don't think we have spite houses here, so that's why I was immediately intrigued the first time I heard about it. I don't know if it was from you or from any other source. However, usually you get spite homes when multiple people own one plot of land, so like 2 brothers go off to war, and one makes his fortune first, and he comes back and builds this grand home on the family land, and he's not leaving enough space for the other brother, who then builds a weirdly and not necessarily useful shaped house just to block the view in the grand house.
Oh, it's the best. God, I love a spite house. I really do. Just the determination it takes to take your spite that far. You know what I mean? You gotta respect it.
It's so much spite.
I just love it. So in this case, William had some kind of bone to pick with his Aunt Lena, and her full name was Caroline Webster Schermerhorn Astor, and with her son, his cousin, John Jacob Astor IV, because they lived right next door to his father's mansion, the site of the new Waldorf Hotel.
Yeah, and she hated it. It opened on March 13th, 1893, and the Waldorf was 13 stories tall and blocked out most of her natural light. And she thought it was like living next to a common tavern.
Can you imagine? I mean, I think common tavern, and I'm thinking Charlie's Kitchen in Harvard Square, right? Everyone in Boston will probably recognize that. This is not a common tavern. It was gorgeous.
It really was a beautiful building, but it certainly angered Aunt Lena. She was not happy, and she also used to give William's wife a lot of grief, insisting that she was the Mrs. Astor and not William's wife, which, honestly, it's some seriously petty fuckery. I'm not surprised this family birthed a Spite Hotel complex. It's not a Spite house, it's a Spite Hotel complex.
It really is.
Let that sink in.
Yeah. They are uber rich, so they have to one-up all the normal folks with their basic wall-shaped Spite houses. But before the Waldorf was even completed, William found that the strain of dealing with his aunt to be just a bit too much. And so he moved the family to London, where they rented a mansion, bought a country estate, and then built a Gothic mansion for themselves in London. But William was shy and sort of sick of public life, so in 1892 he had the brilliant idea to fake his own death. He instructed his house staff to report to the American reporters that he had sadly died of pneumonia. Unfortunately, his plan didn't work. He was found out and ridiculed in the press. I love how weird this story is, and we haven't even gotten to the Empire State Building yet.
I know, I'm fascinated by the Astors. We can't not talk about this. It's like you almost feel a little bit bad for him.
Almost.
Yeah. Almost. Meanwhile, 4 years after the Waldorf opened, William's cousin, Aunt Lena's son, John Jacob Astor IV, talked his mother into moving further uptown, and he tore down her mansion, as you do, and built his own hotel. It opened on November 1st, 1897, and they almost named it the Schermerhorn to placate his mother, but they ended up calling it the Astoria. Thank God. I mean, who would want to stay there? Let's be honest.
Yeah.
It was 17 stories tall, and the cousins entered a truce. And what they did is they merged the two hotels to create the Waldorf Astoria. They were connected by a hallway called Peacock Alley. I love it. Which is where everyone went to see and be seen in society. And today the Waldorf Astoria hotels are actually owned by the Hiltons, and many have Peacock Alley lounges named after the once very famous corridor.
Yeah, and they apparently made the two hotels connect in only one place so that they could brick it up again if the family feuding got to be too much, which, again, I love these people. It was smart, but the hotel was run by a third party. It's actually really interesting. We'll post links for more information because, of course, there was a proprietor who ran it and a really famous chef. That is why we now have like the Waldorf salad and Thousand Island dressing. It's a whole thing. It's fascinating. But yeah, they just weren't really involved in the day-to-day running of that hotel. And so in the end, they were able to keep that alleyway open.
Yeah, and at one point it was the largest hotel in the world, and the first to have electricity throughout, the first to have private bathrooms, I think, and a phone in every room. It was amazing, really.
Yeah. This would have been very luxurious and cutting edge at the time, for sure. So we have photos to post. But the last thing we need to mention before we get on with it is that John Jacob Astor IV, Caroline's son, he had divorced his wife and remarried, and he was on board the Titanic with Madeline, his new, young, and very pregnant wife, returning from their honeymoon. He got his wife into a lifeboat, but he did not survive the sinking. Then on April 19th, 1912, the United States Senate inquiry into the sinking of the RMS Titanic was opened at the hotel in the Myrtle Room. On April 22nd, the cable ship Mackie Bennett recovered a body, and according to the Encyclopedia Titanica, the tag for this body read, quote, number 124, male, estimated age 50, light hair and mustache. Clothing, blue serge suit, blue handkerchief with AV, belt with gold buckle. Brown boots with red rubber soles, brown flannel shirt, JAA on back of collar. Effects, gold watch, cufflinks, gold with diamond ring with 3 stones, 225 pounds in English notes, $2,440 in U.S. notes, 5 pounds in gold, 7 shillings in silver, 5 10-franc pieces, gold pencil, pocketbook, first class, name J.J. Astor IV. End quote. So he was one of the luckily recovered bodies, and his son Vincent, from his first marriage, claimed and wore his father's gold pocket watch for the rest of his life. His new young bride gave birth to another John Jacob Astor, and she would go on to remarry twice more, even though she lost the stipend provided for her in her husband's will when she remarried for the first time.
If you haven't listened to our episode about Nova Scotia and the Titanic, please go back and do listen to it. We get more into depth on the Mackay Bennett. It's a great episode, actually. Like all of ours. So, by the 1920s, the Astors felt that the hotel was becoming a little bit dated.
Oh yeah, rich men looking to swap anything over 30 for a newer model. But seriously, the hotel was 32 years old. I literally can't imagine how much was lost in terms of fixtures and marble. I read that it was hard to demolish it because it had been built to such a higher quality than previous builds at the time, and that a whole bunch of stone and bronze was just dumped into the Atlantic Ocean near Sandy Hook, which is just, it's such a waste. It's so sad.
I know. It's hard to even imagine how much was just dumped. But all of New York society was moving north, and so in 1928 they sold the hotel to the developers of the Empire State Building for $16 million. And the original Waldorf Astoria was closed on May 3rd, 1929 and demolished pretty soon after. The new Art Deco style Waldorf Astoria on Park Avenue opened in 1931. And I think that concludes the Astor's family involvement with the Empire State Building.
Yeah, I think so. I hadn't known about the first Waldorf Astoria before this episode, and I am glad we have some photos that we can share at least, so there's always that. All right, back to the Empire State Building. And again, we're going to focus more on the macabre aspects of this historic landmark. And it all starting out as, well, kind of a pissing contest between, wait for it, wealthy, powerful white men.
I mean, it would be difficult to have a pissing contest about skyscrapers if you are a poor and powerless man.
Yes,
so
exactly.
That's a given. Well, it was the American skyscraper race, and they were trying to compete with the Eiffel Tower, and the Americans were all building skyscrapers.
I know. The Flatiron Building was one of New York City's first, and it's still one of my favorites.
Yes, and that was followed by the now torn down Singer Tower, the MetLife Building, and the Waldorf Building. But not everyone loved these new modern skyscrapers. Aunt Lena was right to be annoyed when the Waldorf was built, because those tall buildings did really block out the light, and suddenly some neighborhoods were in the shadow all the time.
Yeah, I bet Aunt Lena had like a list of things that upset her. I bet my dad has a book about Aunt Lena somewhere. But yeah, unsurprisingly, I'm not a huge fan of skyscrapers. There's this t-shirt that I keep meaning to buy, and it's just a silhouette of Godzilla like stomping on a bunch of skyscrapers, and it says, "I hate modern architecture," which is very much me. But I do love the Flatiron Building and the Chrysler Building. And of course, the Empire State Building is just, it's iconic.
I do like skyscrapers. I wouldn't want to live or work in one, and I don't like to look up at them, both for my fear of heights. But I do love a good nightly skyline full of skyscrapers. I think mostly because we don't really have them here. But I do agree, I think it's horrible how they block out the light down in the streets.
Yeah, it's true about the skyline, though, but it's funny because my favorite bit of the Boston skyline is the old Customs House Tower, which is, it's not any of the new modern skyscrapers. I don't hate them. I don't know. I like them better when they're aesthetically pleasing, like the Chrysler Building.
Well, speaking of the Chrysler Building, that was the building the Empire State would be competing with. Jacob Rescop, the former president of General Motors, he had lived the American dream. He was the son of Irish and German immigrants. He did not come from wealth, but worked hard, had good opportunities, and he made very clever investments. He and a few other investors were in a race with Walter Chrysler to build the tallest skyscraper in the world. Chrysler was keeping the plans for his building top secret, so Rescop had to plan his building to be a bit adaptable, if you want to say so, in case they needed to add more stories when Chrysler's building was done, which they did. You can find more info on that in our sources if you're interested. Rescup would hire architect William Lamb of the firm Shreve, Lamb and Harmon. Lamb had already designed Cincinnati's Carew Tower and the Reynolds Building in North Carolina, and the design of those two buildings, they were said to be the parents of the Empire State Building, design-wise. So much so that one story you'll always read when you look into the history of these buildings is that in 1979, which is also my birth year, and the Reynolds Building's 50th anniversary, the Empire State Building's general manager sent a card that read, "Happy anniversary, Dad." I love it.
I love it. It's really fun, isn't it? I love things like that. So the thing that's most impressive to me is how fast the Empire State Building went up. They built the Empire State Building in less time than it took us to find a house. They built it in less time than it took us to renovate our bathroom. It rose at a rate of 4.5 stories a week and broke a record when the 102-story building was completed in 1 year and 45 days. According to an article on History.com by Evan Andrews, quote, "Using as many as 3,400 men a day, they assembled its skeleton at a record pace of 4.5 stories per week, so fast that the first 30 stories were completed before certain details of the ground floor were finalized. The Empire State Building was eventually finished ahead of schedule and under budget, but it also came with a human cost. At least 5 workers were killed in the construction process." End quote. So the Chrysler Building had a crew of 3,000 men working and no deaths, as opposed to the Empire State, where the confirmed number of deaths, it seems to be 5 of 3,400. But you do read different accounts, but 5 seems to be the generally accepted number. And there are some amazing photos by Lewis Hine, which most of us have seen, of these workers just balancing in the clouds sometimes on a iron balance beam. It makes me dizzy just looking at some of them. And the workers were mostly immigrants or Mohawk iron workers. So the Mohawk peoples had a connection to precision ironwork that started back in 1886 when they were hired by the Canadian Pacific Railway to build the Victoria Bridge across the St. Lawrence River onto Mohawk territory.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine your country without the Native Americans or the immigrants.
Yeah, I mean, we wouldn't be a country without them. European settlers needed Native Americans to survive when they arrived in North America, and immigrants and slaves literally built the country. I mean, they don't really get the credit they deserve historically, but the Mohawk ironworkers are particularly interesting.
So the men who built the Empire State Building were paid about twice the usual rate for manual labor, but they worked without safety equipment, even basic things like hard hats. So really, it's surprising there weren't more deaths, to be honest. You see other numbers reported, and we tried to find the names of the people who died while constructing the Empire State Building, but we had no luck. If any of our listeners out there have more information on the names of the men who died building the Empire State, please let us know. We're really interested. So now, where were we? Right. The race to the tallest building for Chrysler and the Empire State Building. In the end, the Empire State Building wins. It's the tallest building in the world, but its setbacks are more blocky and pronounced than the Chrysler Building. In my personal opinion, the Chrysler Building is a much more attractive building.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, and it's shiny. Bonus points for shiny, I always think that line from Annie, make it clean until it shines like the top of the Chrysler Building. But yeah, the Empire State Building, it does have a great light display, especially lately. They've done all LED and it's super customizable. The first time it was lit was May 1st, 1931, and it was 102 stories tall and the tallest building in the world at that time. And one fact some people don't know is that when the Empire State Building was being constructed, Zeppelins were the height of sophistication in travel. Did you ever watch Fringe? We used to love that show.
No. Never watched it.
It's really good. So Anna Torv, she's in Mindhunter. She was in it. I think you'd really like it. That there's an alternate universe where the Empire State Building and Zeppelins are all part of it.
Yeah, originally they thought that there would be a gangway for Zeppelins at the top of the Empire State Building. They did an early Photoshop job to see what it would look like, and for some reason they legitimately thought that they could just dock it in the high winds at the top of the building. Like, how? Who would think that's a good idea?
I know. You look at how those things were handled, and it's like the biggest Macy's parade balloon. There's like dozens of people involved in getting a Zeppelin or a blimp landed. Yeah, they tried once on 15th of September 1931, and it didn't go well. A small commercial United States Navy airship circled 25 times in 45 miles per hour winds before attempting to dock at the mast. But its ballast spilled and the craft was rocked by unpredictable wind.
2 weeks later, a Goodyear blimp dropped a stack of newspapers on the roof, a part of a publicity stunt, if you will. When the building opened, because of the stock market crash and depression, the building was sometimes called the Empty State Building. So they turned on lights in the empty offices and they did these publicity stunts, to make it more.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get what I'm trying to
We're
say.
fine. No problem.
It's great. We're full. We're fun. Come over here. But they did let go of the idea that an airship could ever dock there. That would have been interesting, though. Transatlantic trips in a Zeppelin were the equivalent of $40,000 a ticket, so it would have been nice to step off, get into an elevator, and be on Fifth Avenue within minutes. That reminds me, we also need to do an episode about the Hindenburg.
We definitely need to do the Hindenburg. Okay. So here's a story I love. In 1932, they had another publicity stunt where they had a seance that tried to summon the ghost of Thomas Edison from the 82nd floor. What happened was, it was the amazing Dunninger, aka Joseph Dunninger, who was a New York mentalist and magician who was friends with Harry Houdini. He offered a prize of $10,000 to anyone who could prove that they were a real medium. He loved to debunk spiritualists and mediums. And so on August 10th, 1932, a medium tried to collect the prize. Her name was Madame Wilhelmine Werner, but I'm guessing it should be Wilhelmine Werner, but I don't know how she pronounced it. And she's described as being gray-haired and wearing a cameo. So I'm kind of imagining like Dame Maggie Smith in Downton Abbey, but like the drag version of Dame Maggie Smith in Downton Abbey, which is kind of my old lady goals. But, I mean, obviously this lady is going to be flashy. I don't know. And anyway, she's there with her seance.
I imagine her more like Dame Edna.
Yes, probably more like Dame Edna. And so she gets there, and she's waving her arms around all dramatic, like Whoopi Goldberg in Ghost when she's faking it. I love those scenes so much. And she's trying to coax the spirit of Thomas Edison out, and she's speaking gibberish, and she's like, I think it was like Tana Wana Wanda or something, just crazy words that don't mean anything. And she says that these are the secret words that Edison had left so they could see if any real medium was able to do it.
Yeah, Houdini had done something similar, right?
Yeah, exactly. So she's doing her thing and she's saying the words and she's trying to levitate objects without actually injuring anyone, and she's channeling Edison, and there's rapping and banging going on and it's so loud and everyone can hear it, and surely enough, that has to be the ghost of Edison, and oh my god, she's done it, right? But then a man knocks on the door and he's like, listen, y'all, sorry for the racket. I've been fixing one of the steam pipes here and there's been quite a racket. So Dunninger once again was able to keep his money. But some do say that the building is haunted, just probably not by Edison. But unfortunately, there have been a lot of suicides at the Empire State Building.
Yes, too many. So the first was apparently a worker who was laid off and he jumped down an elevator shaft while the building was still under construction. And then one of the first visitors to die by suicide was 22-year-old Irma Eberhard.
So I'll read the article from the Santa Rosa Republican, 14th of February, 1935, New York. Quote, while a distraught young man was telling detectives of a threat of suicide he had just received by telephone from the sweetheart with whom he had quarreled, the teletype informed his listeners that he was too late. The girl had leapt to her death from the 86th floor of the Empire State Building. The suicide was identified as Miss Irma Eberhard, 22, whose home was at Lyndhurst, New Jersey. Raymond Rebecki, 27, told detectives that he and the girl had quarreled a few days previously. Louis Peaty, the night guard on the observation tower of the Empire State Building, told police he noticed nothing unusual in Miss Eberhard's behavior and that she seemed interested in the points of interest he indicated at her request. He left her standing at the southwest corner of the building for a moment, and when he returned, she was gone. Building officials said Miss Eberhard was the first person to leave from the observation tower. They expressed surprise that her body could clear the building extensions on the 81st, 41st, and 6th floors. End quote.
Yeah. So she landed on one of the iron and glass awnings and was killed instantly, which happened in more than one death. Policemen and uniformed guards stopped people from jumping more often than they'd have liked.
Yeah, I can't imagine how difficult that job must be.
Yeah, I know. And you'll notice that the article mentioned the fact that she cleared the building extensions. That didn't always happen. There are several cases where people attempted to jump to their death to land on one of the building's setbacks with like a broken pelvis or broken legs. Sometimes they were even blown back upward and ended up on a ledge, alive.
Yeah. You can't take that as a sign. Can you imagine?
Seriously, yeah.
Really.
Sometimes they landed on lower ledges and were blown apart on impact with, in one instance, just the legs landing in front of a tour bus on the street below. One jumper landed on a pedestrian, almost killing them. And many more landed on vehicles, as was the case with what is perhaps one of the most well-known suicide photos in the world, along with the self-immolating monk. That's the post-mortem photograph of Evelyn McHale. Evelyn was one of 7 to 9 children, depending on the sources you're quoting or the sources you find, and her mother had terrible undiagnosed and untreated depression, which led to her eventually leaving the children and her parents divorcing. She and her siblings were raised by their father, and after high school, Evelyn joined the Women's Army Corps and was stationed in Missouri. She later moved to New York, where she worked as a bookkeeper, and there she met her fiancé Barry Rhodes, a college student discharged from the United States Army Air Force, and all seemed well. She and Barry were going to be married at his brother's house in Troy, New York that June. So on 30th of April 1947, Evelyn took a train from New York to Easton, Pennsylvania to visit Barry, and everything seemed fine. The next day she returned to New York, went to the lobby of a hotel and wrote a note. And then she went across the street to the Empire State Building. She was only about 10 feet from a security guard and was not acting strangely in any way when she jumped from the 86th floor observatory, landing on top of a United Nations Cadillac limo parked outside. There was a terrific crash which drew horrified onlookers. And one of them was photography student Robert C. Wiles. He was just across the street and he rushed to the scene with his camera, taking the now iconic photo of Evelyn's body lying on the limo. She's lying on her back and she looks utterly peaceful, like she's sleeping. Her hair and makeup are perfect, her gloves, still pristine and white, are clutching her pearl necklace. The photo was published in a Time magazine as the most beautiful suicide. Andy Warhol used the image and of course, like always, we posted in our Facebook group. It's not graphic at all.
It's really not graphic at all, although I did read, and this might make some people a bit squeamish, I read in a couple of reports that moving her was difficult because she had essentially liquefied, like all of her bones had been pulverized on impact, which is...
It doesn't look like that at all.
It doesn't. No, she literally just looks like she's sleeping. It's a remarkable photograph, and I don't think he ever took another... I think that was his first and last big photograph. But the note is what makes the very existence of this photo just really, really sad and ironic.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Detective Frank Murray found her suicide note along with family photos in her pocketbook next to her neatly folded cloth coat over the observation deck wall. And the note read, quote, "I don't want anyone in or out of my family to see any part of me. Could you destroy my body by cremation? I beg of you and my family don't have any service for me or remembrance for me. My fiancé asked me to marry him in June. I don't think I would make a good wife for anybody. He is much better off without me. Tell my father I have too many of my mother's tendencies." End quote.
Ugh. It's so sad. It's just so sad. And the fact that she managed to hide such severe depression just... It really makes me sad.
And her fiancé, Barry Rhodes, he became an engineer before moving to Florida, where he died in October of 2007. He never married. And in case you have listened to Big Savage, the podcast that covers the death or murder or suicide of Alexander Stevens, then you might remember that one of the things he kept looking up before his death was the most beautiful suicide. And... since the Empire State Building was built, there have been over 30 suicides, even after they erected the barrier.
I haven't listened to Big Savage yet. It's on my list, though.
So good. I just re-listened to it. That's why I remembered.
Oh, nice. So, as for the Empire State Building being haunted, Evelyn's ghost, or the ghost of a smartly dressed 40s-era woman, is apparently seen sometimes.
Yeah, or it could be a living woman in 40s dress and makeup, as it is New York City.
Yep, that's true enough, and it honestly doesn't seem, to be honest, like there's that much activity there, at least not according to the accounts that I was able to find. But if you've ever seen a ghost at the Empire State Building, please write to us. I want to hear all about it. All right, now we need to talk about the story that started all of this for me, which is the story of the B-52 bomber that crashed into the Empire State Building and the incredibly harrowing survival story of Betty Lou Oliver. This story is my new favorite thing. I'm completely obsessed. Okay, so July 28th, 1945, New York City is completely cloaked in a very dense fog. It was a pea souper. And Lieutenant Colonel William Smith was flying from Air Base in Bedford, Massachusetts, which is not far from me, to Newark, and he was going to pick up a commanding officer. He got a bit lost in the fog, and so he radioed LaGuardia, and they were like, don't even try to land. It's really bad. But he was like, no, it's fine. I'll be fine. And their last transmission to him was, quote, from where I'm sitting, I can't see the top of the Empire State Building, end quote. So it seems Smith lowered his altitude. He was trying to get below the fog, but then he got disoriented and ended up turning right instead of left after he flew over the Chrysler Building, which is, I mean, that's an easy mistake for anyone to make. So at 9:40 a.m., all of a sudden, the aircraft crashes into the north side of the Empire State Building between the 78th and 80th floors. It made an 18 by 20 foot, which is 5.5 by 6.1 meters, hole in the side of the building. It crashed into the offices of the War Relief Society and the National Catholic Welfare Council with so much force that one of the engines shot straight through the building, crashed back out the south side wall, and then kept on going through the air for about a block before it fell 900 feet and landed on the roof of a building and started a fire that either destroyed a penthouse art studio or destroyed the art in a penthouse apartment. Either way, there was no loss of life, so that aspect of it was fortunate. But you can just imagine how fast it must have been going in order for that engine to go right through the Empire State Building. The crash created such an enormous explosion, it sent debris everywhere. Smith was a decorated World War II pilot, and 2 crewmen were killed, as were 11 people inside the building. Around 50 to 60 people were on the observation deck when the plane hit. They were all okay. The resulting 4-alarm fire was the highest building fire in New York City's history, but firefighters managed to get the fire under control and have it extinguished in less than an hour, which is pretty remarkable if you consider...
It's amazing, yeah.
Yeah, a fire of that size. So that's absolutely devastating. One of the people who was injured in the crash was 19-year-old elevator operator Betty Lou Oliver. It was the last day of work for her. She and her husband had plans to get out of the city, and the war was over and they were going to be leaving. And so this was her last day, but instead of a nice, simple, easy last day, she suddenly found herself thrown from her elevator car on the 80th floor with terrible burns. Eventually, rescuers were able to get to her. They got her onto a stretcher, and they started to push her into another elevator, which... honestly. And so back into the elevator she goes, and suddenly the elevator car just plummets. The cables holding it had been damaged in the crash, and the weight of the stretcher loading into the elevator broke the cables. Poor Betty fell 75 stories, landing in the basement. And amazingly, there was one small corner of the elevator that wasn't flattened like a pancake, and that was the corner Betty Lou was in. She survived. She had a broken legs, broken back, broken pelvis, along with her burns, but the massive lengths of cable that had snapped had fallen to the ground and created a sort of a cushion that, along with the air cushion, was enough to make the fall survivable. She is in the Guinness Book of World Records for the longest survived elevator fall.
And may no one ever beat her record.
Really? Yeah. So Betty recovered in less than 8 months, and she returned to Fort Smith, Arkansas, with her husband, Oscar. They had 3 children and 7 grandchildren, and she died November 24th, 1999, and is buried alongside her husband.
Do you think she ever went on an elevator again?
She did. She did go back. Yep. She absolutely did. When she was all recovered, she went back up to the Empire State Building. One tough lady.
Amazingly, 2 days later, the undamaged parts of the building were reopened, and the government was offering compensation to people, but the crash helped finally pass a law that allowed people to sue the government. And when it passed, it was made retroactive for the victims' families and survivors of the disaster.
I just couldn't get over her story. I kept thinking of that scene in Jurassic Park when they're getting away from the T-Rex, and then the SUV falls out of the tree and lands on the kid again, and he's like, well, we're back in the car again.
It reminds me of the beginning of Magnolia for some reason. I don't know why. But it really is. It's amazing. It's amazing.
Amazing, right?
And I'm so glad she had a happy ending.
I know. I was like, how did I not know this woman's story? This is amazing. All right. So now we have to talk about the ESBBT, which is the Empire State Building Bermuda Triangle. And since this probably fits snugly into the woo-woo category, I'm going to tell you guys about it. Otherwise, Johanna will sound very sarcastic. All right. So let me You can just hear the sarcasm. All right, I'm going to read to you about it. This is from an article entitled Empire State Building Car Zap Mystery. Daily News staff writer Richard Weir writes, quote, "In the shadow of the Empire State Building lies an automotive Bermuda Triangle, a 5-block radius where vehicles mysteriously die. No one is sure what's causing it, but all roads appeared to lead to the looming giant in our midst, specifically its Art Deco mast and 203-foot-long antenna-laden spire. The 102-story building at 5th Avenue between 33rd and 34th Streets has been home to broadcast equipment since its opening in 1931 when RCA installed an experimental TV antenna. Since the 9/11 attacks destroyed the Twin Towers, the building has regained its status as the leading transmission site for commercial broadcast outfits, with 13 TV and 19 FM stations mounting antennas on its spire. The Empire State Building Company, which refused to provide the Daily News a list of its antennas, denied that it has created any adverse impact on automobiles. Quote, "If the claim were indeed true, the streets in the vicinity of the building would be constantly littered with disabled vehicles," end quote, the building's owner said. According to many doormen in the area, they often are. Quote, "They park here on the block, and when they come back and try to leave, they can't start their cars," said Martin Data, a doorman at 16 Park Avenue. "I've seen a lot of cars get towed away," said a doorman at 35 East 35th Street, who gave only his first name, Joseph. "I see it all the time, at least 10 times a week. I call it the Empire State Building effect." Automotive experts and engineers believe the problem stems from radio frequency interference that's jamming the remote keyless entry system of cars. The remote keyless entry systems operate on specific wavelengths assigned by the Federal Communications Commission, which governs the bands and bandwidths of TV, radio, telephone, and other transmissions. The FCC said it has not received any complaints regarding interference affecting autos in Midtown, and Empire State Building officials don't believe the claims. Lane Gutierrez, 39, a retired investment banker who lives in Times Square. Sorry. A 39-year-old retired investment banker who lives in Times Square? Okay. Sorry. Nearly had to shell out $500 for a rental SUV when a friend's Jeep Liberty suddenly would not start while parked on East 35th Street west of Lexington Avenue last month. "It was a bizarre automotive Bermuda Triangle experience," Gutierrez said. "For nearly 3 hours, the car was sitting there dead. A tow truck driver told them about the radio waves zapping the car's immobilizer chip. We thought he was crazy," Gutierrez said. "Then the car started right up." End quote. What do you think?
I don't even know what to think about it. It's possible, or maybe, you know what I'm just thinking now? Maybe this antenna is like the gate for Gozer.
Yes, that's right. Gozer the Destroyer. Yeah. I'd never heard of it either until I searched things like weird Empire State Building murders, Empire State Building creepy death. Like, so help me if anyone ever looks at my search history. But yeah, do any of our listeners know about the ESBBT? Because if you're in New York City, maybe it's legit. If it is, tell us about it. I want to know.
So, unfortunately, we also have a couple of shootings to discuss. The first involved a politically motivated event. A man went to Florida, checked into a motel, and got a state ID using the motel as his address, and he then bought a gun using the ID he'd gotten. It really sounds like he was suffering some kind of mental breakdown, or...
Yeah, I agree.
So the people who ran the motel where he was staying in Florida described him as usual, nice and quiet, but also said he had a habit of standing naked in the doorway of his room, which faced right out on Florida Route 1. So that's plenty of traffic there, I guess.
Yeah, that's a lot of traffic.
It's a small red flag. We don't think this man was mentally well, so we're not going to get into his name or specifics on motivations for his actions, because honestly, we don't want to give these people publicity. So with any mass shooting, we're going to focus on the victims and outcomes. If you want more information, it will of course be found in our source links. So this man, he returns to New York and he visits the Empire State Building. And the next day, so that's 23rd of February 1997, he goes back to the building and he went onto the observation deck where he then opened fire on tourists, injuring 6 and killing 1. The man who was killed was 27-year-old Christopher Burmeister, a Danish musician who was living in New York. He was visiting the Empire State Building with bandmate Matthew Gross, who was one of the people critically injured in the shooting. And after opening fire, the 69-year-old English teacher turned the gun on himself and died by suicide. After this event, metal detectors were added as security to prevent another attack of this kind from occurring. Rudy Giuliani called for stronger gun control laws around the country, saying, quote, "It should be as difficult to get a gun in Florida as it is in New York City," end quote.
Yeah, that's how we lost John Lennon as well. Our gun laws in this country are only as strong, really, as the least regulated state. It's not a political statement. It just is what it is.
It is what it is.
Yeah.
The second shooting was on Friday, 24th of August 2012. And in this case, the killer and victim knew each other and had worked together. So Stephen Ercolino, a 41-year-old salesman, had laid off Jeffrey T. Johnson, a 50-year-old clothing designer, about a year earlier when the company they worked for did some downsizing. And when they worked together, it was apparently a very contentious relationship, and Stephen and Jeffrey had both filed harassment complaints about each other. Jeffrey blamed Stephen for his financial problems, and that day he hid behind a van on the 33rd Street side of the Empire State Building, and at 9:03 a.m. he stepped out from behind that van, pulled a .45 caliber handgun out of his jacket, aimed for Stephen's head, and fired one shot at pretty much point-blank range. He fell to the ground, and Johnson stood over him, firing 4 more shots. So people are panicking and freaking out, but there's one construction worker who keeps cool and follows Johnson around the corner, heading north on 5th Avenue, where he sees police officers who are stationed at the Empire State Building's 5th Avenue entrance. And he tells the cops that that's the killer, and when they tell him to stop, Johnson raises the gun toward them, and they open fire. The 2 officers fired 16 rounds, killing Johnson and injuring 9 others. 3 people were shot. The others were cut by shrapnel from the bullets hitting objects around them, and they all made physical recoveries, thank God, but most of them and others there that they are, of course, still struggling with PTSD. Johnson's gun still had 2 rounds remaining in it, and they actually found more ammunition in his briefcase.
Yeah, I think the thing that makes this one especially scary, I guess, is the fact that it's not like he was fired and then the next day showed up with the gun, like sort of what you imagine. This was like, it was almost a year later. It's just, yeah, it's unsettling.
It's he really lived after revenge is a dish best served cold, right?
Yes. It's all awful. I mean, it's not like one is better than the other. It's just that obsessiveness is scary to me in a different way, if that makes sense, you know? It's just sad.
There was some obvious mental health issues there, and it's another sad day that affected so many people. Stephen Ercolino had a loving family he was close to, a fiancée who adored him, and his sister-in-law said he was a wonderful uncle. He's still missed, I'm sure he's still missed, and it's just a sad story.
It is. It really is. I think that's it. I think we're ending on a sad note, but I mean, it's fresh hell, so it happens. But I think that's all the weird, sad, and just awful things we could find to tell you about the Empire State Building. So, have you been to the Empire State Building?
No, I've never been to New York. It would have been my last flight as a flight attendant when I quit my job. I requested New York for 4 days, but then there was a blizzard and I got standby, and then I had to fly to Moscow.
Oh.
For 6 hours overnight, so
oh.
wasn't the best trade-in.
No. Okay. Well, it's only about 4 hours drive from ours, so it's pretty easy to do when you visit. We'll go to the Empire State Building together. Oh, it'll be so much fun. Now we can tell random people terrifying facts about it. It'll be great. People love that. I think I've been there like close to a dozen times now. My mom, and one of her favorite movies was An Affair to Remember. That whole meeting on and that was, what was the one? What was the whole thing with if you can paint, I can walk? It was, oh God, that movie. But what was the one with Tom Hanks? They like redid it where they meet on the top of, didn't they meet on the top of the Empire State Building with Meg Ryan?
Sleepless in Seattle, yeah.
Sleepless in Seattle, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, they met on top of the Empire State Building. Well, the horrible child made that happen.
The horrible
with
child.
His little backpack. These
child
meddling children.
I love it. We went really late after a Broadway show. I think it's when we were there for my sister's 30th. It was late, and it was about maybe an hour before they closed. It was like 1 a.m, and it was awesome. We had the whole place to it. There was nobody there. It was like, we took our time. It was amazing. And then the last time we went, I think it was when my nephew was visiting, and so it was in the summer, and we all went to New York City, and we went to we took Ben to go see The Lion King on Broadway, and Paul and I were saying it was going to be great. We're going to go really late at night. It's so quiet. Not in the summer, it's not. Oh my God. The lines were forever. And it was those kind of lines, you know, when it's like you're in a huge room and they've got all those roped off lines to keep you in your corral, like veal, you know, you're just whatever. And you can see the end and you think, oh, we're almost there. And you assume in your mind, like, that's going to be where the elevator is. But then you get there and nope, it's another big fucking room with a whole big long line of snaky snakes. And then you're like, well, we've already been in line for 48 minutes. Like, at this point, what are we going to do? Ugh. I was in so much pain. Everyone was annoyed, tired. By the time we got up, it was like, my brother-in-law Ian was like, let's get everyone together for a photo. And Lucy and I were like, go fuck yourselves. So yeah, we all left. But then there were so many of us that we were having to take 2 taxis if we went anywhere. And there was a stretch limo in front of the Empire State Building, and it ended up being cheaper than 2 taxis. So we took that back, which was actually really, that was fun. But yeah, we'll go when you're over here. It's good. It's good. How about something good this week?
My something good this week. To be honest, it wasn't the best week. It's been a little bit over 2 months now that my dad is gone, and now the grief seems to change from the shock feeling to the thing where I keep thinking, I can't believe he's really gone and I'm not gonna see him again. Like, at least here. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I do.
I just really want my dad, but you know, it is what it is. Last week on Wednesday, on 19th of August, it was my dad's birthday, and we went out to eat steak because my dad loved to go out for a steak dinner. So that's what we did, and it was quite lovely, and I hope my dad had a great first birthday over on the other side, and I hope he saw us having a steak dinner in his name. I know that wasn't the really cheery something good this week, but it's the most something good for me that happened, so you gotta deal with it.
No, I get that. Yeah, listen, I get it. Last week was the 15th anniversary of my first husband's death, which seems amazing to me that it was 15 years ago.
Unbelievable.
I know I was 28 when I was widowed. I was a baby. And then 3 days after the anniversary of Adam's death is my mom's birthday, was August 11th. And I don't know, I think birthdays are, for me, they're the hardest. It's harder than like the anniversary of deaths or other milestones. Birthdays for me are always sort of the hardest. I know it gets better. I know it does. I know it will for both of us, but it just takes time. We'll get there. We're just not there yet. That's all right. It's okay. My something good is my dad and my sister are coming up from the Cape this week, and maybe if the weather cooperates, we're going to go to a restaurant. I haven't been to a restaurant since March, so I'm really hoping that we can go out and have a nice dinner out in a restaurant. I really want someone to bring me a perfectly shaken martini. Yeah. I'm not even a big martini drinker. It's just been such a long time. Fingers crossed. Thanks so much for listening. We talked a lot about suicide in this episode, so if you need help, please call 1-800-273-8255 if you're in the U.S. And we have international helplines listed in a pinned post in our Facebook group.
Yes, our Facebook group. If you want to join a really nice, weird kind of... I don't even know how to describe this group. You have to go and see it for yourself. Just search Fresh Hell Murder and it should pop right up. It's a really lovely place on the internet.
It is.
I can't always let Annie beg for the reviews, so this week it's my turn. So please, if you would do us the huge favor and honor to go onto iTunes, if that's what you're using to listen to us, and leave us a quick rating and review. Just tell us we're awesome and you love us and we're the best thing that ever happened to you. That would be, I mean, it's easy, right?
So easy. It's just the easiest.
It really helps others to find our podcast. We then get recommended more often to people who like similar stuff. So help us grow, please.
Yeah. Please. Yes, thank you. Please and thank you. And tell your pets we said hi. Please.
We love them so much.
We miss them. Tell them we miss them. Come say hi on Twitter or Instagram. And our website, freshhellpodcast.com. You can find all the ways to get in touch. And so until next week, if you're going through hell,
keep going. Tschüss.
Bye.